The gay bars from the 40s and 50s had a lights system, so that when the police were coming, or if they thought the police might be on the way, they'd flick the lights on and off a lot,
Wow.
just flicker them, so that everyone would switch partners.
No, that's the best thing ever.
The male couples, two dancing together, and then the female couples would be like, whoop,
That's
swap partners.
wow.
So the police would walk in and just see straight couples everywhere.
Wow.
Be like, oh, we'd heard this was a gay bar. Never mind, carry on.
Hello, listeners. Now, if you've been following me for a while, then you're probably familiar with a certain series on TikTok that tells the story of two women that unexpectedly fall in love in the 1940s, Betty and Evelyn. And after just celebrating our 100th episode, I wanted to use this episode to talk about queer history and the real Betty and Evelyns of the world. But I needed some help in doing that. And who better to help me than the absolutely stunning Jessica Kellgren-fozard, YouTuber, vintage fashionista, disability activist, and of course, member of the LGBTQ community. Thank you so much for being here, Jessica. You absolute wonderful woman. You tower of YouTube.
You are too kind. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. It was a wonderful intro.
Thank you. Like I say, I do pride myself on them. But yeah, it writes itself. It really does, because your content is an absolute delight. It's so chatty and conversational. Aesthetically, it looks fabulous. But it's talking about real issues. And it's kind of the similar vibe I wanted this podcast to be. Chatty and conversational. If you watch it on YouTube, looks brilliant, but also sometimes covers real issues. So I've been following you for a while. I've always loved your content. So thank you for being here. I wanted to do something for you because I really like getting to know my guests. I really appreciate when people make the effort for me. And so I wanted to make the effort with you, if I may. So I just wanted to say, hi, I've been learning a little British Sign Language. Thank you for being here. I'm excited.
Oh, I love that you did that on a podcast as well. Like, I love that the effort was made, even though we're on a podcast. That was really sweet. Thank you.
You're welcome. Can I just tell you my two favourite signs that I've learned? Okay, this one, top tier. Lesbian. Loved that.
Excellent one.
That really made me chuckle. One. But more so, bisexual. What's this? Oh, this is brilliant. I love this.
Yeah, so there are like a range of kind of different signs, and they're all quite regional, depending on where you live, and they also change generational signs. So some signs that younger people use, older people have a different type of sign, especially if things that are quite like cultural, like sexuality and stuff. So there are so many different signs for the same
I was speaking to someone who said, oh yeah, no, British Sign Language has an accent. And I was like, fabulous. That's the coolest news. I've also noticed we have gone similar with the blue white collar ensemble. Yay us. So thrilled. You look great. And I wanted to just start. Oh, you're welcome. For your fans and followers, and for mine, I wanted to learn a little bit about you, if I may. Now, I know your social media name is Jessica Out of the Closet, so let's start there. When did you first come out of the closet?
Yeah, so Out of the Closet was actually a name that my wife came up with for my social media related things. Obviously, there's the pun there of coming out of the closet, both in the gay sense and in the fashion sense, because I've always had a very alternative. It's hilarious to me, actually. I never think of my fashion style, my sense, the way I look as being alternative, because it's just the way I look. So to me, I'm like, well, of course, obviously, this is the way that things go together, don't they? Everyone would pair a collar and pearls. Like, who would wear this and not put a brooch on it? How silly. Goodness me. It's just the most natural thing in the world
Yeah.
to me. But then that's not what most people wear. And I do recognize that sometimes when I walk down the street and notice that more than half the people might look at me, and I'm like, oh yes. I look different. I had forgotten. So there's that kind of vintage sense there that I've always really had. I've never had a conventional dress sense. I didn't go through. I know a lot of vintage styled people went through certain phases of different alternative fashions, and
Yes, we
I
did.
didn't really
Yeah.
do that. I know, I missed out. I didn't get my goth phase. I didn't get my, I don't know what, skater girl phase. my
Yes, so
punk
many of us
phase.
were goth. What
None of
was
that.
that? What was that? And now we've all got weird piddly tattoos that have been left over, but now we're just putting lace over them. Yeah, what happened to us? But you didn't go through that.
A number of vintage girls who were like, yeah, I was goth back in the day. I'm like, you were? And now they're all in their like cottagecore running through the fields. Like, this is a twist.
Yes.
But no, I very much from the start have been one of those like, I love dresses types of girls. And as a girl, I always skirts and dresses. It didn't kind of hold me back from doing anything.
Yeah.
But people ask me now, they're very much like, can you do things? Do you take your dog for walks looking like that? And I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
This is what I wear. This is how I dress. It's fine.
It's amazing how women coped with dresses for a long time, actually. It was fine. We're fine.
Weirdly, for the majority of history, women have actually had children and like played with them, done stuff, lived lives whilst wearing dresses.
Yeah.
It is possible. Not everyone needs to wear jeans. But I'll be at a playground and someone comes over and goes, oh, just to let you know, your skirt is touching the floor. I'm like, yes, I'm sitting on the floor. It would be a little weird if it wasn't. Like, it's okay.
Brilliant.
It's all right.
Brilliant.
Everything's fine. Or they'll be like, oh, your toddler is touching the back of your dress. I'm like, good.
Yeah.
I know he's there.
Yeah.
Like, excellent. That's fine.
One day, I hope you mess with them a little bit. And I hope next time you pretend to be one of those Victorian mothers and you ring a little bell and your wife runs in pretending to be the nanny and goes, I'm so sorry, ma'am. And she gathers the children and runs away with them. You know how that always used to happen? I hope you play up to it one day, just the once.
I think it'd be much better to just be like, what toddler? Where? I don't see. Can you still see him?
Oh, no, that's priceless. I love the double play on that title, though, Out of the Closet. Of course, the fashion and the gay. I think that's great.
Yeah, and then so with the kind of the gayness of coming out of the closet, that's another thing that I've always, from the beginning, I don't really have a coming out story in the way that most people have to kind of sit their parents down and be like, parents, I'm gay. And then they had a reaction to it. I from the very start never told them about any boy that I liked ever. I think I was probably like, oh gosh, I need to be in the boys. Oh, really? Must I? But then I'd come home and be like, oh, there's this new girl. She's amazing. Oh my goodness. And they'd be like, you are 4. Could you calm down? I'm like, absolutely not. I've got the biggest crush. She's so great. We held hands. Yes, my mother used to call it Jessica's crush of the week because I would just, move from crush to crush to crush.
Brilliant.
But my first true love, though, was Rogue from the animated X-Men.
I don't blame you.
Which, absolutely understandable. I think we can all agree.
Not to excite you, I do have a streak of grey hair. For some reason, always had it. I do have a random, like underneath the first layer of hair, I've always had a streak of grey. Did used to joke I was rogue. Putting that out there.
Since you were born?
It's not to lower the tone or anything, but I actually got it after I was bereaved when my grandpa died. I think sometimes stress can bring on, discoloration of your hair going grey. When he died, I got this random streak of grey hair, and it never went, well, obviously it never went away. And I didn't have the heart to, it felt like a battle scar. So I kept it, and I have it to this day. And it's always grown grey, just that one portion. It's bizarre, but I've had it, yeah, for a while now.
How interesting.
Mm.
Well, I have some friends who have like a patch of hair that just grows white,
Mm.
but it's related to a condition that also causes hearing loss. But
Ah,
so now whenever I see someone who's got like one patch
yeah.
of white hair or grey hair, I'm like, oh, do you also have hearing loss by any chance?
Oh, you know what?
I'm not diagnosing you with
No,
anything. I'm
no.
sorry.
We
It's
love
just
being diagnosed on the
an
internet
interesting
in the
thing.
comments. But yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to put a pin in that because there's some elements of truth to what you just said to my situation. I always just thought it was circumstantial to life events, but anyway, sorry, do continue.
Anyway, um, yeah. So out of the closet, just about being very kind of open, being who I
Yeah.
am, showing up as my true, oh gosh, it sounds so American, showing up as my true
Authentic
authentic self.
self.
I know, we're, gosh, so British to just be like,
Mm,
no, can never,
yeah.
must always talk about self in dour manner.
Yes.
But I think there can be something really nice in it to just
Mm,
be like, actually, you know what? I'm here.
yeah.
I think I'm pretty great sometimes. Because the reason I started my online presence,
Mm,
as it were, was because as a teenager I went through a lot of medical
yeah.
upheaval and hardships and some awful times, and I was in bed rest for 2 years. And during that time, I really didn't have any kind of media that gave me hope or gave
Mm,
me anything positive, any future related thing that wasn't just incredibly miserable. And I wanted to make something
yeah.
that called back and spoke to that younger self
Yeah.
in a really positive way,
Mm,
and sort of said, it's okay. We don't need to dream about when I get better and my life in the future is amazing.
mm,
When I no longer have these medical issues, I will get married and have this family and live this life and have this wonderful career. Instead, let's work from the place of I will grow up, I will still have this condition, but I will be better able to manage it. I will know how to handle
mm,
myself and my life,
mm.
and I will have wonderful things.
Oh, that's
So
wonderful.
that's the kind of thing that I really
Yeah.
wanted it to be able to represent.
Mm. And when did the vintage like when I look at your fashion, it takes me back to late 40s, early 50s. Is there a particular reason those eras speak to you a bit more than others?
Yeah, yeah. So, uh, funnily enough, it does also slightly relate to my illness in a way. In that, when I was a small child, I found so I have a thing called hereditary neuropathy with liability to pressure palsies, HNPP, and it, as a small child, meant that my nerves sort of hadn't fully worked themselves out. I think
Mm,
it's just a good way of describing it. And I found things very painful physically on my skin. So anything kind of rough, um, things that were lacy, things that were new. A lot
yeah.
of new clothing really hurt me, especially the seams. Um, if you think about it, have you ever had a scar, like scar tissue? It
Mm,
felt like all of my skin was scar tissue.
mm,
Um, and so for me, just my parents trying to dress me was an ordeal, and trying to get clothes that would work for me was
mm.
awful. So what my grandmother did was she'd always made clothes, and she made clothes for my aunts in the 40s and 50s. So she made clothes for me from the patterns that she had. So I was always dressed in these kind of like, oh, good, excellent. I can just dress like, I looked a bit like Alice in Wonderland in the
Oh, it's my
90s,
favorite book.
really, with my little like dresses and smocks.
I love that. I've got contact dermatitis. It's why I've got awful old lady hands because it doesn't, I never know what triggers it. It changes on the day. So I can't relate completely, but I can relate to the awful irritation and pain that you get when something irritates you. But I love that the very fibers of your being were calling out to be dressed vintage. That's the best thing ever. That could be a book in itself, couldn't it, really?
Yeah, it was like, I'm sorry, I need soft fabrics. I need this roll of
Yes.
fabric that's been sat in my grandmother's
Yeah.
sewing room since the 1950s. I can't be wearing these straight out the shops
Yeah.
1990s lacy, because everything had lace on it then, I swear. Every
Gosh.
girl's piece of clothing had some kind of lace on it. Um, and that really starched lace. And it just did not work for me.
No, no. And what about your journey dressing vintage as a gay woman? Has everybody thought, "Gah, hypocrite," or thought that it's a bit contradictory that you do that? Or have you ever had any backlash that you happen to love and personify vintage, but also be gay?
You know, it is very interesting. I feel like there has been a change and I think I'd give you a different answer if you asked me about this 5 years ago, 10 years ago,
Oh, yes.
15 years ago. I don't know what answer I'd give you 15 years ago, but if you'd asked me about this years ago, because now it feels to me like there's a huge movement of queer people who love vintage. Now, when people come up to me and say, I love your videos, I love what you do, da, 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 obviously they watch my stuff, so there's going to be an overlap there. But they either kind of have a bit of a vintage twist to them, or they have that like a little alternative dressing sense. And I now am at the point where if I see someone who dresses vintage, I'm like, probably queer. Probably got a little bit, little thing in there. Maybe. And if not,
Brilliant.
just a really nice, like, open-minded person.
Yes.
Like, Goodwood Revival.
Oh,
I'm like, just lovely, open-minded people with an alternative style
yeah.
and thus alternative, open to the different, types of families and whatnot. And I think that's really nice. Like, I think there's definitely such a movement of vintage style, not vintage values,
Yes.
that
Yes.
it makes vintage a really safe
Yeah.
space.
Well, I have a theory that you say that I love the idea of they're probably a little bit queer. I'll let my listeners have a guess about me on their own, whether it's just that I'm a nice, accepting, open person, or maybe a bit queer. Obviously, those who watch the Betty and Evelyn series will probably think the latter. But I think that people who are really seem to be really open, accepting, kind souls that dress vintage, I think it's because they're really connected to nostalgia, and they're really connected to their own heritage, their own past, and that in turn informs how they behave in their present and their hopes for the future. So I think because they are so nostalgic and bloody empaths, they have a bit more of a gentler way about them because they're just a bit more connected.
So I definitely see that. But definitely the answer I would also add to that, or I would have given sort of 5 years ago if you talked to me about this, is that it can be harder outside of that space or it was harder in purely queer spaces.
Ah,
I found maybe 5-10 years ago to be a very high femme.
okay.
Like, I definitely, when I was at university, which was like 10 years ago, I went to a LGBTQ plus group meeting, and as I was walking up, they didn't know where I was going, but these two people came over and were like, "Oh my gosh, and just sort of started kind of being a little bit rude about what I was wearing. And one of them even said, like, doesn't it feel bad to kind of dress for men that way?
Oh,
Like,
oh, okay.
like, you know, you also, but you know that there's a meeting of the LGBTQ plus society here today.
Yes.
Why assume, friend? Why?
Yeah.
What? And there's that kind of assumption, or there definitely was, especially in my teenagers as well, that to be high femme, to have a lot of those kind of feminine traits around dressing, must only be for the opposite sex, must only be for the attraction of
Ah.
others. And I found that very strange and difficult to deal with
Mm.
as a teenager, because for me, it was so much about how much I personally felt around my own gender and the way
Mm.
that I displayed it,
Mm.
and femininity for me and what that meant. And I'm like, but clearly I'm so feminine. Can't everyone tell I'm gay? Like, clearly I just love all women stuff so
Yeah.
much. Everyone must be able to look at me and be like, lesbian.
Yeah.
Yeah, clearly. Like, sadly, that's not how that
Mm.
worked. I never managed to attract those like skater girls that I was after.
Oh, wow.
And I was 14, following them around
Yeah.
in my pink dresses. Like, they can clearly tell I'm a lesbian. They can clearly tell.
But no, as
Look at
far
me.
as they were concerned, that was dressing for the opposite sex and hoping to
Yeah.
attract. Oh, what a shame. Is that the biggest amount of, is that why it wasn't as accepted as it is now in the queer scene? Is that mainly the reason that when they see you so high femme, they thought, well, that's, you're clearly just doing that with the one goal of getting a man.
I think there is a kind of tipping point. So I think if you're kind of dressed in a way where it's very obvious, like, this is a vintage look, this look is a replica. This is
Mm.
a 1940s, 1950s style. I'm kind of taking from this era. People do seem to have a little bit more of a respect for it,
Mm.
almost.
Yes.
Um, Whereas I think if it's just the kind of like all pink, all day, every day, people as a society aren't as generally welcoming and warm towards that. And I think that's obviously, it's a shame, and it says how much what we think about femininity.
Mm.
And I think it does everyone a great disservice, in the same way that I think it's a shame when we think about androgyny. We're
Mm.
thinking about, oh yeah, everyone can wear boxy suits. And isn't it great that, tomboys and girls can wear trousers and run through woodland and da da da. And I'm like, well, yes, but what about androgyny the other way? Like, there's a huge part of the population who don't want to do those things,
Yes.
and shouldn't it be open that everyone can do however they feel they want to express themselves?
Mm.
Um, yeah, I just feel like all types of gender expression should be open and available to
Yes.
everyone,
Yes.
and it doesn't mean anything.
Mm.
I think we put a lot of meaning into the way that people dress.
Yes.
A
I
lot
I
of time, it
agree.
doesn't
And
necessarily need to be there.
I found it, like you said earlier, it's fine when you're in the community and you're looking at all your besties and you're all having the best time ever. And then the minute you step out the community and you're suddenly alternative, that's when you start to find out what people really think. And I've come across it. A lot of people I've spoken to have come across it. The connotations but around physical appearance, people cannot separate them. So I find that sometimes vintage fashion or appreciation, people tie together with vintage values. And that's why the hashtag was even started, because people were getting backlash for that very thing. Um, do you feel that the two can truly be separated?
Absolutely.
Mm.
I mean, of course. I think it's easier to for me to be like, I have a wife. My wife is
Yeah.
mixed race. It's
Yeah.
so therefore I can very clearly be like, well, obviously, I don't have vintage values.
Yes, yes.
Whereas I think if I was in a straight presenting relationship with a partner who was also white, I would feel almost like I had to slightly explain myself a bit
Yeah.
more some of the time, and be a bit more like, oh, please, don't say that, because I
Yes.
do sometimes find myself in situations where people will start saying things to me with the assumption that I agree with what they're saying. And I'm like, oh no, you've really misread this
Yes.
situation. Oh golly. Oh boy.
Oh no.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of like, oh wow. Because I get this very common comment, and it goes one of two ways. Often people will come up to me and be like, oh, you dress just like my Anne used to dress.
I've had that too. Yeah.
And they get a little teary in the eye.
Yeah.
And half the time it's like a lovely, he
Yes.
just goes, it's just so lovely to see. Thank you for really making my day.
Yeah.
And then just walks away with a smile on the
We
face. And
love
you're
that.
like,
We
oh,
love that.
like, that's really sweet. Like that man, like, he lost his wife and
Yeah.
he's just happy, just having a nice day now. Like, that's
Yes.
nice. But then you also get the ones that come up and they'll say like, oh, you dress just like my Anne used to dress. Such a shame that women nowadays, and then you get the whole spit, and you're like, oh,
Yes.
oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
this is not. I have somewhere to be.
Yeah.
Right, backing
Absolutely.
away, feeling unsafe.
Yeah.
Where are my exit
Yeah.
routes? Are there other people around?
Yes.
Gosh, it is a shame that just the way you look can
Yes.
for some people have a certain connotation.
Oh, yes.
But that's the assumption that I think we're also fed by things like our history lessons in school, because we don't get taught necessarily in history about the people who existed in that time and were what we today would even still consider alternative. Like,
Absolutely.
we're not necessarily talked about our queer history in
Yes.
school. So we're not thinking, oh, yes, well, queer people did actually exist in the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah.
Thus, when we see someone dressing in the style of the 1940s and 50s, it doesn't mean they're straight.
Yes.
It doesn't, like,
It
gay people were there too.
Yes. It upsets me so
it's not a
much.
thing.
Yeah, it upsets me so much that it took me the first time I ever learned anything, and I mean anything about queer history, was when I had to study it for a play that I was in when I was a fully fledged adult. So it wasn't a play I was in at school. I was in theatre, working in theatre, and I was doing a play, and the play was called Queers. And my one woman show part of it was called Missing Alice, about a woman whose husband was gay and she was acting as his beard, and it was set in the 50s, right? And then there was another one that my friend did of somebody who liked to cross dress, and that was the first time. That was when I first found out anything about queer history. And following that, it was when I started the Betty and Evelyn series. And the fact that there is so many incredible stories about queer history, and you're not taught a damn thing I mean, I went to a Catholic school, so you can imagine how much detail they went into it there.
Oh, yeah, wow.
So it was non-existent. Back with vintage, obviously, it's not the niche that it used to be. I agree with you there. It's not the niche. It's very much embedded into many communities now. And there's been a rise of vintage content creators because of that, of all, different varieties. Do you think that the rise of vintage inspired content creators is overall positive, or do you think there are some aspects of it that are worrying?
Well, I think that it's very easy to see all the positive things. I love being able to like share tips and tricks. That's excellent. I love that it means there are now more companies that are making kind of reproduction items, and that has a bigger market, so they're able to keep going, and that I can get, like a modern dress that is actually in a vintage style or made with
Yes.
vintage fabric. And that's brilliant. That's wonderful. So for me personally, like, great, good, so many wonderful things.
Mm.
However, some of the negative things are that, because, like with any movement, the more it grows, it's going to cross over into other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, definitely.
And the vintage style and tradwife
Mm.
crossover is one I don't love.
Yeah.
That's a thing. So
I
yeah,
almost had a
finding someone
tradwife.
online in
Yeah.
Instagram and being like, yeah, wow, oh, I love their stuff, and then scrolling a bit further down and going, oh, back out, whoopsie, didn't mean that one. Oh no, don't follow, unfollow.
I do a lot of study on this. This notion of anemoia, nostalgia for a period we didn't live through, being so prevalent online. And like you, overall, I love it because it is encouraging people to make, do, and mend. It's encouraging a bit more of sustainable fashion. It's encouraging us to get in touch with our heritage, our history, good and bad. But I do think there are damaging things. The tradwife movement is one that does worry me, not least because of how sometimes the women are portrayed, but also the privilege that comes with tradwifing that just is not accessible to most people. I did almost did get a very well known, and this is her words, tradwife onto the podcast. But we kind of lost communication again. But I'm still intending on doing that because I'd love to hear from the other side of the fence. But also, anemoia. Some have said that it has played a part in the rise of movements like Make America Great Again and Brexit, and a yearning for the good old days. So yeah, I agree with you. It depends how far you go, and like you said, sometimes you go far enough, and then you're sort of like, oh, back up, back up, back up. No, I've come to the wrong. I'm lost again. I need to go back.
I mean, I think for me, as someone living with disabilities, chronic illnesses, and being gay, like the 40s and 50s would not actually be a great time for me. I would not love to be there, really. No
Yes.
thanks. Also, does anyone really want to live in a post-war period? Like,
No.
no, I don't think so.
No.
No thanks. They still had rationing. There are many, many things. It baffles me really that people are like, yes, we need to return to this
Yeah.
time. It was great. Was it?
Exactly.
Was it really? Were you there? Have
Exactly.
you genuinely studied this
Yeah.
period, except for through your rose-tinted glasses?
Yes,
I
in a mess
don't
of
think you have, friend.
aesthetics and rose tinted glasses. That's our understanding of history sometimes. And that's sometimes why I worry about content and content creators. And that's why I take sanctuary when I find content creators like you that keep it real, as well as giving me all the beautiful aesthetics that I need. Because I want to feel like I'm enjoying a really nice cupcake, but also learning. You know what I mean? That's all I need. That's all I want, you know?
The nice cupcake is just to lure you in, so you actually learn. That's
Damn it, it
that's how
worked.
I like to think my TikToks and my reels work.
Yeah.
Is that people start watching them because they're like, "What is she wearing?
Yes.
What is this?" And then by the end of it, they're like, "Oh, I learned a thing. Oh wow, oh okay,
Yeah.
interesting."
And that's the great thing because you've got the very quite on trend now vintage, grandma core, cottage core aesthetic. And then you're like, oh, yes, come and join me. You'll love this. And then, it's going to be about lots of lovely beauty related things that your grandma might have done. But wait, there's also this. And I think that's just genius. So, like an evil genius. So, let's talk about learning for a moment. And I said I wanted to speak about the real Betty and Evelyns of the world throughout history. Why? No, let's start here. What struggles would queer women have faced in past generations? I know it's a long. You can pick just some eras in particular if you like, but
Well, I think when talking about the past, we, I think, always need to be mindful of where we're talking about, for one thing. The fact that although we live, well, I live in a country where I, as a gay woman, have many freedoms, many rights. I'm married to my wife. Our marriage is as equal as a marriage of, legally, obviously, it is equal, but it's as legally equal as a marriage of opposite sex people. We have a child together and we are both listed on his birth certificate. That to me is wonderful. We are his parents, that is that. We are married, that is that. But there are so many countries in the world where that is not possible, even in 2024, where they may have some type of marriage, but maybe it's not quite the same. There might be some type of civil partnerships, but it's not quite the same. You may be able to have a child together, but it's a series of, oh, well, then you've got to add to the birth certificate. So you've actually got to adopt your own child and, and a whole range of things. So I think any conversation about the past, we have to start with perhaps acknowledging the privileges that we have even here and now that many people don't have, even today, which I think is also why it's important to talk about the past. And I try and mix in when I'm making content, mix in talking about, like, isn't this a fun historic fact with, oh, also, did you know this is still going on right now around the world? Here are all of the countries where it's actually illegal
wow,
to be gay.
wow,
So let's think about that. But gosh, so things that would have affected gay women in the past. To start with, depending on the amount of money they had, that would also have had a significant impact on what they were able to do.
yes,
It's, I mean, universal throughout history, throughout time, that a lot of people with more money are generally more able to live their lives in a way that is more aligned with who they are.
yes,
So that's obviously important as well. But yeah, to even think about things like they perhaps wouldn't have had access to even the ability to store their own money. If they had a job, they're working outside the home, to things like getting bank
yes,
accounts. Would you be allowed to get a bank account without having a man's signature, your husband's signature upon legal documents?
yes.
At some points in time, most of history, that wasn't even an
No.
option for a lot of
And even
women.
if you had
You
your
know,
own money, what were they doing with it? Because there weren't gay bars to hang out in, were there? I read about some underground, gay bars throughout. I'm just going to use the 40s and 50s as an example because that's where my interest centres. In London, there was some, like, some underground places that women could go, but like you said, location is so important, and financial stability is so important, because if you were not in a location where those bars were around and you did not have the money to go to them, or even access your own money without the presence of a man, you were likely not even going to meet other women that were gay, unless perchance, I suppose.
I mean, it is fascinating because we can look at periods like the Weimar era in Germany, which was just before the rise of the Nazi Party, where there was a greater deal of openness, and there were sort of gay bars, and there was a greater ability to have this sense of people were able to congregate um, and even openly state that the property was being used for this, whereas
Wow.
in many other places you'd have to call it something else, or even just kind of run and hide when the police came. One thing I did always love about, well, it's not love, it's not a great thing, just like a cute little fact, is that a lot of the gay bars from the 40s and 50s had a lights system, so that when the police were coming, or if they thought the police might be on the way, they'd flick the lights on and off a lot,
Wow.
just flicker them, so that everyone would switch partners.
No, that's the
So
best thing
that
ever.
if all the the male couples two dancing together, and then the female couples would be like, whoop,
That's
swap partners.
wow.
So the police would walk in and just see straight couples everywhere.
Wow.
Be like, oh, we'd heard this was a gay bar. Never mind, carry on. But yeah, throughout periods of time, there have been interesting bumps where people had a little bit more freedom, whether that be through money or through just the political system at that point being slightly more open to things. In the Weimar era, for instance, what I was going to say about that is they had sort of gender cards where trans people were able to carry this card around that said that they were allowed to be marked down a as the different gender than the sex that they had been assigned at birth,
Wow.
because there have often throughout the years and in different countries been laws against cross-dressing. However, it has been all right as long as you can prove through your little legal piece of paper that you're trans.
Wow.
So there are kind of fascinating little bits like this in history, which I think it's always interesting to talk about. But the one thing that I feel is kind of a sort of a shame when it does come to talking about LGBTQ plus history is that it can be so difficult for us to pass down.
Oh.
Unlike a lot of other cultures and groups, we don't tend to have children that are also part of our group. So if we're passing down our French culture, for instance, we're like, well, the grandmother is French and she has all these recipes,
Oh,
and then she passes them
yes.
down to her children, and they pass them down to their children, and everyone's like, yes, we're all just talking about our French culture and passing along all these stories from our French village, and yeah, this is how we live. Whereas, as much as we might talk about things, we don't necessarily have those relationships with our LGBTQ plus uh, generational elders.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
and obviously, we've lost a lot of them for unfortunate reasons, and I always think it would be a wonderful thing if we had a better way of bringing people together, that we could
Yes.
adopt queer
I guess
grandparents.
that's why storytelling, queer storytelling, is so important, because I suppose in a way your ancestry, our ancestry has been lost in that sense, because like you say, it's not as easy to pass down something as it is to pass down through a generation of the same family or in the same village or in the same church. Whereas, it's harder, with that kind of stuff. So is that why you feel that queer stories should still be told, and proudly? And I don't just mean present queer stories, but like the Betty and Evelyn series, telling stories of what has been, so generations today can conceptualize the journey so far.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's very important both for queer people and for people who aren't. I think that people who have just sort of either just discovered their own queerness, or want to know more about themselves, need to know that they aren't new, that they aren't they've not suddenly mutated into the world. like that you've always existed, you've always been here, you've always been a part of society, you've always been a part of the world. This is nothing strange.
Yes.
This is nothing new. This is nothing abnormal.
Yes.
This is, in fact, perfectly and completely normal. And that's a really important thing to know, I think, to recognize and to realize that there have been so many people like you. And yes, some of them have done amazing and wonderful and incredibly creative things. And some of them lived very ordinary
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah.
And it's fine, whichever you go on to do. But they are your people. You have people and you are supported. That's a really important thing. And also then for the non-queer people to know that this isn't a new modern thing. I think there is this kind of thing, not to put generations against each other, but there are some things within the older generation who tend to go, oh God, this is all like Gen Z, isn't it? All these Gen Z, they're just really queer. It's just them. They've just become very, very gay. Well, no, not really, no. No.
Yeah.
Although they do self-report as fewer of them being cis het than other generations, it's likely just because they feel really comfortable and are more willing to explore themselves and their feelings and talk about these things, and they're not scared that they're going to lose their job, which was something that was entirely legal. You could just throw someone out their job for being gay. Up until like not that many decades ago, you could break a tenancy because someone was gay.
Gosh.
You could, and people still throw their children out their house, which is wild to me that that's not prosecuted as some kind of child abuse, but that's fine.
I mean, God forbid that we'd nurtured a world where people felt comfortable to be themselves. God forbid that we did that.
Absolutely wild.
And
I think
we've got a long way to go still. Gay marriage in Britain's only, is it 10 years old now or something? That's nothing.
Yes, so gay marriage in Britain actually became legal the year that I met my wife.
Oh.
So yes, it was 10 years ago. Which, again, is just absolutely mind-blowing that there are children who are still in primary school who were alive when gay marriage was not legal in the UK. And yet we can very much be nowadays like, oh yes, we're a very, very equal society. It's very But I look forward to the day when we're not like the lesbian mums and we're just Rupert's mums.
Yes.
That would be quite nice.
Yes, I think you're right. Because one of the things I wanted to ask you is, and I know it's a bit of it's a big question, but has the modern world come as far as, well, I'll just go as you would have liked in accepting members of the LGBTQ community? And I hate that I have to say that. Like, is the world accepting of? They are, like, we are the world. It is the world. Like, I don't like that. Oh, are we accepting of the LGBTQ community? Is the world. We're all the world. But unfortunately, we're in a world where we have to ask questions like this. Same, you could ask the exact same question for people of the disabled community, people of the deaf community. Has the modern world become lenient and accepting to people who may have once been a minority, in your opinion, or have we got a long, long way to go?
I think it can be too easy to group LGBTQ plus peoples together in a question like that. When it's a good question, but I think it's too easy to group us all together when actually we are a very diverse group of people, and I would say that we have different levels of being respected and accepted within society.
Yes.
I think that society has done pretty well to accept same-sex couples.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not
Mm-hmm.
perfect. It's not like completely
Mm-hmm.
amazing to the point where it's not even a
Mm.
thing anymore. But like, that's good. I mean, most people know that you shouldn't be homophobic. Like, that's good. We know that that's a
Mm.
thing you shouldn't do
Mm.
anymore. That's good, right? That's nice. But then, still within that acronym, we have so much further to
Mm.
go when it comes to trans rights. We have so much further to go when it comes to rights for intersex
Mm-hmm.
people. We have so much further to go when it comes to just the cultural sort of acceptance. And again, I don't like saying it, but
No.
the cultural acceptance of the different types of asexuality.
Yes.
Um, I think that it can be it's such an easy joke for comedians and TV
Yes.
shows to reach for when it's that's a human being's lived
Yes.
experience. Is that acceptable?
Yes. And
No.
you're right. It's a very easy brush to paint a group with, the LGBTQ brush. I think the problem is in our cultural acceptance is that you don't lump everybody together. Remember to see everyone as individuals. And also, I think I'll just pepper in there religion. And I was born and raised Catholic. My best friend, him and his husband, have a gorgeous, wonderful life together. Well, his brother-in-law is a vicar, and there's still a lot of issues very much in 2024 regarding a huge part of the population, which are people who are religious as well. And there's a lot of contradictions and wars that they have to have in their own minds. Yeah, so yeah, I agree with you on that. And like you said, it's very easy to use certain members of any community as the butt end of a joke. And I think you're right, even about Gen Zers, like, oh God, everyone's so queer these days, everyone's so soft. That's very easy to be used as a joke as well, but it diminishes an entire person's being, which I just think is absolute. I just think it's a lot of times unacceptable.
I I just even for me, I'd also like to see a lot more, and I think of this more now as a parent.
Oh yes,
I would so much. I just find it wild. I think when you I mean, not that you sign up necessarily to have a parent to have a child unless you're adopting them. You don't tend to like sign on a piece of paper. But when you're having a child, you don't know anything about what your child's going to be like in the future, but you need to be prepared for anything
mm,
and you need to have your heart open. I think that's a really important thing. Um, I think that you can't go in with an expectation of what your child is going to
mm,
be like. You just have to be prepared to love them and to support them and to be their cheerleader.
mm,
Um, However, they live their life. Like, I don't think that you can, like, well, I'm really going to love you and support you and be there for you. And, I'll pay for your university and everything. But not if you date this person.
mm.
Then nothing.
Yeah,
No love for
yeah,
you. Like, I'm sorry. What? How did that? What happened
yes,
there? Where did that go? What? This is very
yeah,
bizarre. Or, I'll love you forever. You mean everything to me, blah, blah, blah,
mm,
blah. But not if you ever wear a dress. What?
yeah,
Excuse me? This is bizarre
yes,
behavior. I think that a parent's role is really, we're there to guide young people as they bring themselves up and sort of step out into the world. But we can't be putting our ideas and our thoughts onto them, particularly because society moves, society changes, and a lot quite quickly as well. And a lot of people are coming from a place of, of a historical unknown almost, of being like, well, I've never dealt with this, therefore very, very strange, must be wrong. Like, actually, no, history shows it's all fine. It's all good. Been here the whole time.
I think your child is so lucky to be able to have that in front of them. Because I think of all the little Bettys and Evelyns and Jessicas and everyone out there who didn't have that go-to person going, oh no, 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 look, this is so ridiculously normal. I'll show you how normal. It's bordering on boring. Look, watch this. And then you could educate them about everyone that's been before them. And that's why when I wrote Betty and Evelyn, the story isn't very exciting. Like, it's just them going about their... I mean, the actual filming of the story is really boring. I don't know why people still tune in. It's just me saying a script to camera, describing the mundanity of their life, that they went to get the rations or they nipped the allotment because, like you said, I wanted to show the norm. I wanted it to be like their Coronation Street, you know what I mean? People's little comfort show. But the two main characters of this story happen to be queer, and better still, discovering their queerness. And then there's Ed, her older brother, who's as queer as they come. And that's I like telling those stories because now I hope in the modern world, our younger generation will be able to find their community in some way. I think you're right in saying the community isn't there by default, unfortunately. But God, I hope they find them somehow. And if that's through social media, then so be it. Even though social media is dangerous in many other ways, I hope they find the right side of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 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 kind of a big advocate for social media because I think used in the right ways, it can be an incredibly powerful, incredibly wonderful tool. Um, and it's sort of interesting because obviously I work in social media, and I'm also bringing my child up in a screen-free way, which is a twist. But for me personally, as a disabled teenager who didn't have like a queer community around me or anything like that, the internet was such an important and huge part of my teenage years, my 20s now, of being able to just feel that community spirit, that acceptance, knowing that there were people like me out there, that I could talk to them, that we could uh, be together, have something in common. And I think it really is that. It's for for those people who are in the small city, the small town, the village, don't know anyone like them, and can look and see like, oh, there are queer people my age, there are queer people my parents' age, there are queer people my grandparents' age. Wow, yeah. And it's like I can get out of here. Oh yeah. I can go and live this boring, mundane, wonderful life.
That's the aim. Is there an LGBTQ historical fact or little story or something that's ever resonated with you, made you smile or chuckle, or one of your favourites that you tell at a party?
People really love learning about matelotage, which is where pirates used to get married. Um, two men, two male pirates used to marry each other, and they'd get pensions
No,
together, and they'd have benefits.
I
I
don't know
just
why
think
the
it's
pension bit
adorable
made me laugh. Like, I don't like
that they
two
like.
pirate men getting married. Oh, cool. But getting a pension. Why is that such an adorable thought of pirates getting
But
pensions?
yeah, so like because they were married, they'd get life insurance for each other.
Oh,
This is so cute.
that is a bloody what a curveball. I didn't know what you were going to say, but I did not expect it to be about pirates. And as far as your content goes, and like the future of Jessica, spreading all these wonderful messages so that, you know, rather than all the parents out there fretting over their child being glued to a screen, there might actually be some positive things through that screen. What would you like to continue to do with your content? Have you got any big aspirations for yourself or your career?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, well, I'm currently writing. I'm I'm quite interested in children's literature.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big passion for me. So I'm kind of in that sort of area is where I'm headed in the future, as well as also obviously continuing with queer history and also looking at sort of queer fashion history.
Love that. Well, it's funny because I'm also writing a children's book, and it's about my encounter with a pigeon. It's very random, but I'm using this encounter I had with a pigeon as a symbol for how you can find your community, your flock, or your family, no matter who you are and where you are, if you are brave enough to keep looking. That's like the whole sort of tagline, if you like. So we
Oh,
can be cute little modern day Beatrix Potters together, which I think would be bloody wonderful.
well, that sounds delightful.
Hmm.
That's very sweet.
Oh, thank you so much. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me. I could talk to you for literally years about the modern world, the state of mental health, and beyond. But no, but I've genuinely loved it so much, Jessica. You're an absolute delight, and yeah, just keep doing what you're doing because it's great.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yay! I'm so glad.